A little monument was erected 10 years after this event. I did it one morning at low tide by stacking a few stones in a pile on the rocks. Did anybody notice it and wonder what the significance was? The next day the pile was gone. Did the ocean take it during high tide? Or did it annoy somebody and did they remove it? The reason that I asked was because the stranded empty Phoenix was a source of annoyance to many of the residents that lives on the beachside. It laid on their front porches, so to speak. Before I tell you more of the significance, I urge you to subscribe and press the bell symbol. That is if you want to stay up to date with the full story. I dealt with it in 6 episodes. This is episode 2. These events played off in the quiet upmarket suburb of Sheffield Beach in the town of Ballito, in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. The geographical position is shown under the video, and if you copy and paste it into Google Earth Pro, it will take you there. In the first part, we had a look at some of the events that happened on the day that the empty Phoenix stranded during the storm of the 26th of July 2011. It raised more questions than it provided answers. Fact is that the ship was stuck and that they couldn't get off the rocks during the storm. The swell didn't help much either. It was then important to mitigate all risks, such as the threatening one of pollution, and to do all salvage work possible to get the ship ready for a refloating. Would that be successful? Removing the oil and fuel and other movable items would also lighten the ship, which may facilitate loft. There was pressure for that to happen quickly. If the tide and the weather played along, everything should be in place to take advantage of the situation. There's also a question of logistics and method. The entire beachfront is blocked off by residential homes, and access to the beach is through pedestrian paths that follow the slope from the rope 40 meters higher. Moving endless containers up there is not that feasible and can probably only be achieved by helicopter. And there seems to be quite a bit of oil and fuel on board. So let me walk you through the history of those next days and how it happened and what solutions were used in the end. On the second day after the stranding, on the 28th of July, things suddenly got remarkably busy, but with good reason. Firstly, the weather was excellent in the morning. The clouds were gone. It was wind still to a great extent. Later the wind picked up and it was a little bit colder, but all the required work could commence. And the curious amongst us could walk there without the inclement weather of the past days in our faces. I was one of those. I went twice on a day. First time, early morning from about 8:30 a.m. onwards. On the beach, the ship was a visible presence and seemingly at home, as if it has always been there all the time. The tide was at low, and the tanker basically sat directly on the exposed rock bed. Further in the ocean, the salvage tug, the Smith-Amandla, laid, waiting for action. The relationship between the Smith-Amandla and the empty Phoenix started well before the stranding. We will cover that story of what happened prior to the stranding in the next video. The ship was doused in a soft light due to the early morning sun and some loose clouds. A helicopter was hovering above it, and this helicopter was obviously appointed to assist with the salvaging. It turned out to be a Puma from Starlight. The helicopter was always on mission ready status and was on medevac standby 24/7. This was so in case any emergency evacuations needed to take place. Salvage crew were put on the ship, of course, and they were at some risk. The only way in early stages was to do that by helicopter. But on the right-hand side of the ship, the so-called starboard, a tow ladder was visible, and it must have been used as well. But landing would be in the water unless the tide was really low. It was a nice time just to take lots of still photos that contained lots of details, and that was what I was doing. After spending time there, I went back home, as I felt for a moment that there was not much else to see. I lived about 2 kilometers from the site, and I could constantly hear when the helicopter was flying by. Later I realized that I had to go again, as there was of course a development and activity. So I made the effort to walk there again. On the second visit of the day, at about 12:45 p.m, the place was swamped by visitors. The cars were piling up and they were parking before the road barriers that were set up and people walked the long distance to the ship. It was easily about a 2-kilometer walk. The sea was now at a higher tide than in the morning. The water was choppier and a breeze was blowing. And except for the normal spectators, another species became prevalent, the journalists. TV journalists were there as well, and they were preparing their video shoots for various news bulletins for that evening. The stranding soon got countrywide attention, even international. The pollution control companies, SCUTTLED and supposedly DURBAN, were preparing the groundwork for the clean and safe recovery of the fuel. We could now get an idea of what type of operation was planned to remove pollutants. Sandbags were filled with beach sand and protective sheets were laid at the high tide end of the beach as a base for the receiving fuel bladder receiver. Meanwhile, the host tube that would form the conduit from a ship to the beach was lowered from a ship with a zip line. The personnel from the salvaging company SUBTEC, that is now the days called James Fisher SUBTEC, were visible everywhere. The sandbags were put on various parts of the protective sheets to hold it in place. It appeared to form a second safeguard against beach pollution in case there were spillages or damage to the bladder. Also at the back of the beach at spring tide level, the drums that contained oil and grease and other possible pollutants have already been flown ashore by the supporting helicopter and were awaiting collection. The slope up to street level was an obstacle and it would not be easy to move them there without some specialized equipment. The Starlight Puma appeared again from the Durban direction and was transporting something that resembled a generator, which it probably was. After the generator was placed on deck, a person was lowered to the deck as well. And then in return, a receptacle with stuff, to call it so blunt, was hoisted off the deck and the Puma flew back in the direction of Durban. Durban was about 40 kilometers away in a straight line from this site. The pipeline was now ready and situated next to a pump, and the linings that were put on the beach were awaiting the bladder. At 3 p.m. I returned back to my house as it appeared as if not much more was going to happen for the rest of the day. On the 29th of July, which is a Friday, I returned to the scene at 12:40 p.m. and I took a few photos from the high up roadside first. I estimated that the road was at least 40 meters above sea level and it provided a good vantage point to show off the ship from higher up. Then I moved down to the beach again and started to shoot video there from the back line of the beach so as to get a fuller picture and idea of all the activities. More videographers set up camp. I suppose I was one of them. I was new to this. One of them didn't like it that I got him under my camera and he took revenge. And the visitors were streaming in all the time. They were taking pictures and they were on their cell phones and they were just everywhere. The atmosphere was quite jovial and it actually made for a nice outing and you didn't have to pay for it either. It did, however, require long walks. It was winter and a little cold and the breeze was a problem and most people were dressed up quite warm. But it never gets too chilly in this town, which has a subtropical climate in general. The bladder was now firmly in place and the pumps were started and the bladder was receiving fuel at a good rate. Personnel from SUBTEC was on the scene and once from SCUTTLED and DURBAN as well. So far so good. 2 tripod hoists were also in place to aid with the activities there. There was this constant rhythmic hissing sound, which was the sound that emanated from the pump and the liquid it was pumping through. From the bladder, and the fuel was pumped up the slope to tanker trucks at street level. Street level was about 40 meters higher up, as I said before, and not very accessible due to all the houses that occupied the beach line. The tanker trucks were lining up elsewhere and were called in one by one on demand. The springing forth of the tide, or so-called spring tide, in which the high tide would be at its maximum in a 2-week period, was going to happen on the 31st of July. This was 2 days away, and the salvaging team was aiming to be ready to attempt a refloating of the empty Phoenix during this period. Of course, this had to happen with no or little spillage pollution as a consequence. which meant that the team was under pressure to complete all fuel and oil removal before that day. There was going to be two high tide peaks on that day, one at 4:05 a.m. and the other at 4:30 p.m. The afternoon peak had the advantage of some daylight as well as a possible choppier sea, which will all aid in lifting the ship somehow from the rock plate on which it was situated. Captain Nigel Campbell, Deputy Chief Operations Officer at the South African Marine Safety Authority, SAMSA, released the following statement on the 30th of July as far as progress were concerned. I reference all sources under these videos if you want to check them out. I quote him, "The operations continue to remove the pollutants from the vessel, and to date we can report the following. All the drums containing lube oils, grease and other rubbish from the decks have been flown ashore. Pumping of the fuel commenced yesterday to the bladders ashore and then to the road tankers. It is estimated that some 50 tons were taken off. The heavy-duty pumps finally arrived, having been delayed when the road transport became stuck in the snow and were flown on board this morning. This has increased the pumping rate to approximately 100 tons per hour. The operation is being slowed due to the slow rate of pumping the bladders to the road tankers against a 40-meter head. If the current rate is maintained, removal of the fuel should be completed on Sunday the 31st of July. The work of strengthening the bow is ongoing and preparations are being made to connect the Smith Amandla to the Phoenix before last light today. This is not an attempt to tow the vessel off the rocks, but to stabilize the vessel and stop her moving on the rocks." End of quote. There was no major other activity and I left again at 1:30 p.m. In our next video, we are going to look at the refloating attempt of the MT Phoenix tanker. As I said before, it would be on the 31st of July of 2011. Time is estimated at about 4:30 p.m. in line with the high tide of the spring tide. Please remember to subscribe so that you can be informed when this happens. If you liked this video, please press the like button as well. We also need to talk about the recent history of the ship and how it ended up getting here, and you can look forward to that. Thank you. See you on the other side, and thanks for watching.